I am a worker in a small store in a busy shopping mall near my home. Our store is so small that there is only one employee at a time. Unlike those weird stands in the aisles, we sell mostly accessories and occasionally some shoes. One day I was on shift and, as usual, I was alone. It was a Thursday afternoon and the mall was packed, as it usually is, although we don't normally get too many customers. At one point, a guy came in and approached the back where I was behind the counter. To give you an idea, the guy was rather short and skinny, wearing a half-worn mustard yellow shirt and unflattering black pants. Also, his haircut was rather pitiful, to tell the truth. When he approached, I could smell cigarette smoke in the air, and his teeth were very yellow. From all the smoking, I guess. The thing is, the guy tried to hit on me, but in a very weird way. He started telling me that he had been watching me and thought I was very beautiful. The most disturbing part was when he mentioned that he had been watching me. I don't remember much of what he said after that, but it wasn't anything good either. I tried to be friendly with him until he suggested we leave together right then and there. Obviously, I said no, and he asked me when my shift was over. I didn't give him an answer to that and declined his proposal as politely as possible. After that, he left the store. I thought it was all over there, but I was wrong. The guy showed up again about 25 minutes later. He passed right in front of the window and slowed down to look at me. I completely ignored him, and after a couple of minutes, he just went on his way. He came back again less than an hour later and did the same thing again, but from further away. I was getting uncomfortable, but as long as he didn't come in again, I figured it wouldn't be a big deal. For the rest of my shift, I only had a couple more customers and tried not to think about what was going on outside. Finally, several hours later, I finished my shift. I left the store and started walking toward the parking lot, which was on the east side of the mall. The place was still crowded, so it took me about 10 minutes to get to the parking lot. But about 100 feet after I started walking, I looked out again and realized that the same guy was there again. It was horrible to know that he was still there, and that he had probably seen me. I kept moving towards the exit, glancing back occasionally, and each time I did, I realized that the guy not only still had his eyes on me, but that he was following me and getting a little closer. There were several people between us, but he was determined to keep up with me. I had no idea what I planned to do once he got closer, so I decided to make a turn in an area of the mall I didn't usually walk through to try to lose him. The thought of finding a security guard quickly jumped into my mind, so I started looking for one, even though I knew it was a bit tricky to predict where they might be. There are several out there, but sometimes they're not available when you really need them, so I started walking faster, with this guy still behind me. This went on for quite a while, and I tried to go through at least 3 or 4 corridors, but with no luck. There were a lot of people, but no security guards. I was starting to get desperate and decided that I had to get out of the situation any way I could. Then I realized that with all the crowds, there was a good chance of losing the guy if I moved fast enough, so I started walking more hurriedly and a little erratically. People were looking at me funny, but I didn't mind at all. I needed to lose this crazy guy. I walked into one of the bigger stores where there were a lot of customers, and right after I walked in, I saw that the man had done the same. I moved back and forth through the aisles of the store and, after a few moments, decided to hurry out. Just as I was leaving, I turned a corner quickly, and to my surprise, I no longer saw the guy behind me. I had made it. At that moment, I sighed, thinking that I was now safe. I walked a little further, just to be sure that I really had lost him. Finally, I felt calm enough to head to my car, which was on the other side of the mall. I was quite attentive as I walked to my car. Every time I glanced back, I didn't see it and finally made it into the parking lot. But when I was walking was a few feet away from my car, I got distracted looking for my keys in my purse, and when I looked up, I got the scare of my life. There he was, recited from the driver's side car door, with his arms crossed in front of him and a big twisted smile on his face. I stood completely paralyzed, and for a few seconds that felt like hours, we maintained eye contact, me terrified and him with a gotcha expression that gave me chills. I started looking around frantically, hoping to see someone else in the parking lot, but no one was there. "What do you want?" I asked him, and his answer, as well as the way he said it, gave me terror. "You," he said in an almost mocking manner. At that moment, I did the only thing I could. I started to run back to the mall, but he caught me right away, covered my mouth with his hand to silence my screams, and started to drag me towards an empty area where there was a kind of service room or machine room. I don't know very well because thank God I never got to enter that place. When we were a couple of steps away from entering that place, I heard a, "Hey, what are you doing? Let go of that girl right now," followed by heavy footsteps running in our direction. At that very instant, the creepy man let go of me and ran off across the parking lot, getting lost among the cars. The man who screamed was a security guard, and he immediately came to where I was, asking me if I was okay and if that name had hurt me. I was crying and shaking with panic, but fortunately that degenerate didn't manage to do anything to me. I was so thankful to God and to that guard. When he checked that I was okay, he told me that he had alerted the mall security. Later, the police arrived, and thanks to the security camera footage, they were able to identify the man and arrested him the next day. It turned out that the guy had a couple of other harassment complaints and a restraining order that his ex-partner had filed. I really don't know what happened to that guy after that, but I never saw him again. I still work at the same store, but since that time, I have never experienced an incident like that again. However, now, I always have pepper spray in my purse, and I'm always very vigilant when I leave the mall, looking around carefully to make sure there is no one suspicious or, God forbid, the same guy. Anyone who has worked in a fast food restaurant at night knows how peculiar some customers can be during those hours. To add spice to the mix, I was at a 24-hour McDonald's located right next to an exit, which made it a hot spot for truckers, cops, party people, and anyone looking for a hot meal in the middle of the night. As expected, I met a myriad of, shall we say, peculiar characters. I could write a whole book about every strange human being I came across on that job. But not only that, I also had to deal with crazy situations, like fights breaking out in the restaurant, wives finding the husband with the mistress, drunks who didn't even know where they were. But despite that, they were never too scary, just absurd and some even funny. However, there is one experience that really left an impact on me during the 2 years I was there. That night started like any other night on the early morning shift. I arrived at 10 p.m. and, as expected, everything was pretty quiet. It was always that way at that time before the activity would ramp up between 11 p.m. and 2:30 a.m. and then become spotty for the rest of the night. That night, I anticipated it would be slow. I had a bad day and my car wouldn't start in the morning. My husband tried to fix it, but cars are not his thing, so I was without a vehicle. Plus, I was feeling terrible, as I always do in the middle of the week, after several days of work, and I just wanted to curl up under a blanket and sleep. But of course, I had bills to pay, so calling into work to stay home was not an option unless I was really sick. So fortunately, I managed to drive my husband's truck that day. Around 2 a.m., my colleague and I were without much to do, and because the pace was so slow, I was able to relax a bit. I remember it was one of those quieter nights I've experienced in that place. It was Wednesday. Maybe that's why the flow of customers was sluggish. My partner left for a moment to the office, maybe to do some paperwork or maybe to steal a nap. I didn't have the energy to question him while I was alone at the counter, listening to music on Spotify on my phone. Suddenly, the little bell on the door rang, and in walked a man who looked rather strange. He wasn't old, but he wasn't young either. He looked to be around 40 or so. He didn't look dirty, but he also didn't look like the kind of guy who would stop by a mall to buy some hamburgers. His clothes looked a little shabby, and he was a little shorter than I, who am a fairly tall woman. The guy didn't look like he weighed more than 130 pounds, even with the thick winter coat he was wearing. The man gave me a bad feeling from the first moment I saw him. He calmly approached the counter, and I asked him, "Good evening, sir. What would you like to order?" The guy just looked at me and smiled, a twisted, strange smile. I wish I could have captured that instant in a photo. The look he gave me was very unsettling, and there was something about the way he looked at me that just didn't fit, that made me uncomfortable before I even uttered a word. His eyes were so dark that they seemed like endless wells, and his smile was so wide that it gave a glimpse of his yellowish teeth. After a moment that felt interminable, she spoke in a deep, thickly marked voice that resonated with a southern accent. "Wow, you're more beautiful than I expected." Okay, that response was pretty bizarre. I assumed he was going to order some fries, but maybe he was deciding on something else. Honestly, I'm used to seeing strange behavior on the night shift, as I told you, since there are a lot of customers under the influence of alcohol at those hours, so I just smiled and politely replied, "That's fine, sir. When you decide what you want, let me know." The man, upon hearing me, smiled broadly, showing a set of crooked, yellowed, worn teeth, and rested his hands on the counter. I couldn't help but notice his long, dirty fingernails that made me cringe. I tried to keep my composure when he spoke again. "Forget the fries, what time do you finish?" Normally in situations like that, I would respond that I'm married and move on with my life, but perhaps because I didn't feel right or because his presence made me uneasy from the start, I responded with a more brusque tone. "If you're not going to order food, you should leave." To my surprise, the man let out a laugh as if I had told him the funniest joke in the world. And before I could say anything I would regret, I turned to head for the office door. But at that moment, my coworker opened the door and noticed that I was visibly upset. I told him about the disturbing man who had come in, and he smiled as he knew exactly which guy I was referring to. He suggested that I take a break and that he would take care of the troublesome customer. So without hesitation, I picked up my coat and went outside. I sat in my husband's truck for about 15 minutes, listening to music, trying to forget about that awkward encounter. But just before I got back inside, I saw the man loitering in the parking lot, carrying a bag of groceries. I was a little relieved that my colleague seemed to have handled it well, so I decided to stay in the van for another 5 minutes to keep that stranger from seeing which car was mine. When I finally returned, my colleague looked a little uneasy. I asked him how the interaction with this individual had gone, and his response left me even more concerned. He said in a hesitant voice, "I don't know if I should tell you." I began to tease him, giving him a light punch on the arm, insisting that he tell me. He finally agreed and told me that the guy was completely out of it. When I went out to take his order, he started asking about you. I told him you'd gone home, and he went crazy, screaming and cursing. I ended up giving him a free fry just to calm him down and get him to leave, but as he was leaving, he threw me one last warning. "Tell Veronica I'll come see her soon." I froze. How did he know my name? I wasn't wearing a name tag or anything identifying me. That unsettling information stayed with me for the rest of the night, preventing me from concentrating on anything. Every time I heard the door, I would startle, expecting him to come back, but fortunately he didn't. Who was this guy and why did he know me? What the hell did he want from me? At about 4:20 a.m., I made a request to my supervisor, begging him to let me leave a little early to go home. He was aware that I was not feeling well and understood that I needed to get away from that place, especially after the disturbing experience with that creepy individual, so fortunately he was understanding and granted my request. We were in the middle of winter at the time, and as I was saying goodbye, it started to snow. Then I realized it was the first significant snowfall of the season, even though fall had just ended a while ago. I was relieved that I had taken my husband's truck, thinking that if I went slowly I could get home safely. However, I was totally wrong. Just a few hundred meters from my work exit, I lost control and ended up crashing into a tree due to the heavy snowfall that made it difficult for me to see. Fortunately, I didn't suffer a scratch thanks to the fact that I was going at very low speed, and from what I could see, I didn't seem to have caused much damage to the truck either, but I couldn't get out on my own, as the front tires got stuck in a ditch. Luckily, I called the police, and to my surprise, they arrived within minutes. As I got out of the truck to greet the officer, something I never would have imagined happened. It turns out that from the back of the vehicle, that creepy man from the restaurant jumped out and started running through the trees in the middle of the night and in the middle of the snowfall. At that point, I completely froze and started screaming hysterically, while the cop looked confused, asking me to explain what had just happened. I finally managed to calm down and explain, and he used his radio to call for backup, but the guy was not located. After a while, we returned to the restaurant, where I told the officers the whole story. They reviewed the security camera footage but were unable to get a good shot of the guy. The most disturbing thing was watching the video of the man getting into the back of the van. Barely 10 minutes had passed since I took a break, and he returned to the parking lot angry, with the bag of groceries still in his hand. He looked around for a while, tried to open the door, and when he realized it was locked, he stomped away and apparently cursed. But then he tried the back door of the van and it did open, so he snuck in there. I felt really lucky to have hit that tree that night, but mostly to have been stuck, because if I hadn't, I don't know what could have happened. To top it off, the bag of food he left in the back contained a fry-up that he didn't even want. I realized that he knew my name from the beginning, as well as when I worked and what vehicle I was driving. Although this happened several years ago, I still feel uneasy at the thought of going back to work at night. I always lock my doors and stay alert because some people really do look like monsters. I'm Leonardo, I'm 55 years old, and I own a small store where I sell sports clothing and footwear, as well as some bodybuilding and camping accessories. Last year during Black Friday, I took the opportunity to make a good deal, and frankly, that's exactly what happened. I was very pleased with the profit we made, especially since we were able to sell items that had been in inventory for a long time. At the time, I had 2 employees, Jeremy and Fernando, who were really talented at their jobs, and that had a direct impact on my profits. I also had a very beautiful wife. Her name was Amanda, and she was 15 years younger than me. When I returned home after a tiring business Friday, I was tired but happy. I talked to my wife about the day's success and told her how hard I had worked, to which she replied, "I'm glad to hear that, love. Now eat something and then let's get some rest. You need to get your energy back." I agreed with that and enjoyed the delicious dinner she had prepared for me. The next day I woke up and noticed that it was already 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Sure enough, the store was closed and Amanda was not in bed with me. She had probably started her day much earlier. I was glad she hadn't woken me up, as I really needed that extra rest. I showered, shaved, and brushed my teeth. As I came out of the bathroom, the silence in the house made me realize Amanda wasn't there, so I went out to look for her. But there was nothing to make me think anything was wrong. As I was making myself a cup of coffee, I noticed that the newspaper was nowhere to be found either, something that struck me as very odd. I decided to call her, but her cell phone was turned off. When evening came and Amanda still did not return, I became increasingly alarmed. I tried to reach her several times, but to no avail. It was then that I decided to go to the police, even though I knew I had little choice but to inform them, as this was a classic missing person case. They asked me if I had tried to contact hospitals, friends, or family. I admitted that I had not, as it had not occurred to me. They told me to keep in touch, and that within 48 hours, if I didn't show up, they would open a file to investigate. That night, I called several hospitals, not only in our area but also in nearby locations. Amanda did not work outside the home, so she had no co-workers she could ask. Days passed, and she became an official missing person. Childless, I was dealing with her absence alone, but life had to go on. On one hand, I was grateful for it because I couldn't imagine what it would be like to have young children, and for them to have to deal with their mother having disappeared out of nowhere, and having no idea where she might be or what might have happened to her. Every day that went by without hearing from Amanda was a real nightmare for me. 1,000 things went through my head, and none of them were encouraging. I came to think that maybe she had left the house to go shopping or whatever and someone had kidnapped her. Or even worse, she could have done her a greater harm. And maybe my wife's body was buried or abandoned somewhere, without me knowing anything about it. It might surprise you how many things go through your mind when you're in a situation like that. But while my brain was eating away at all these catastrophic thoughts, I knew I had to get back to the store, because as the owner of my business, I couldn't afford to take a break, especially after the successful Black Friday. There was a lot of work to be done, and my employees were also depending on their jobs. I decided to tell my employees about the situation, and their response was supportive. "I'm very sorry for what you are going through, Mr. Sandoval. The best we can do is wait and pray," Fernando commented. I was grateful for his support, although my hopes were slim. However, during the course of the week, I was confronted with something I did not expect, and it certainly was not good. I went to the bank and was shocked to discover that half of my savings was gone. Filled with indignation, I made a fuss. "This is theft. I demand explanations." Soon after, I was in the manager's office. "I regret to inform you, Mr. Sandoval, that your wife was here last week and withdrew that amount in cash," the manager said to my surprise. He explained that she had claimed she was going through a difficult situation and needed the money to pay bills and open a new store. I didn't question the bankers, as they had been trusted customers for years, but the information left me stunned. My frustration was such that I made a big fuss in the office. I was screaming my head off to the point that security was called and then the police. I was arrested that afternoon, although it was only for a short time. The next day I was out, but my thoughts were somewhat confused. My wife had crossed the line, and on top of that, she was being treated like a criminal for disappearing $90,000 that was vital to keep the business going. The amount I had left was not enough to cover my personal expenses, medical insurance, 2 vehicles, and so on. In the midst of this crisis, I had to fire one of my employees. "Don't worry, Mr. Sandoval, let me go. Jeremy needs the job more than I do. I am young and was considering returning to my home country," said Fernando, who was Argentinian. "Thank you for your understanding, Fernando. I'm sorry it has to be this way. It has been a pleasure working with you. We wish you the best," I replied, feeling sincerely grateful for his understanding and solidarity. I tried to get my life back on track by selling the house and buying a modest apartment. I also sold my expensive cars and watches. But as the days went by, the obsession to find Amanda took hold of me, and after months of waiting with no answers from the police, I decided to hire a private investigator, a woman named Angela Miller who had a reputation for being the best at what she did and especially at locating people. After 3 months of long waiting, I finally received a call from Angela. "I have something to show you," she said. Filled with excitement and anxiety, I arrived at her office in less than an hour. "We found your wife and her friend, Mr. Leonardo," she said as she passed me a series of photos. I didn't utter a word as I saw the picture of Amanda smiling and having fun on the beach. But the most shocking thing was that she was not alone. Fernando was next to her, hugging and kissing her, and I immediately understood what had happened. I had never felt so humiliated and betrayed in my life. The American police were aware, but since Amanda and Fernando were in Argentina, my only chance of bringing them to justice was for them to return to the United States, unless I decided to travel there and take justice into my own hands, something I have flirted with for the past 2 years. I work in a 24-hour pharmacy, and I've had some really crazy experiences with customers, especially during the pandemic when many came in looking for the strangest tranquilizers and such. But nothing, and believe me, nothing compares to what happened to me last month. I was on my night shift, the one that is always pretty quiet and my least favorite for me. This was because we had cameras everywhere and my boss was strict with the rules during work hours. No cell phone use or reading books while working. So, even though the boredom was killing me, I had no choice but to stand there waiting for someone to arrive. When midnight came, it was the halfway point of my shift, and suddenly, the door opened. In walked a tall, thin guy with a bunch of missing teeth and wrinkled skin that looked like a Shar-Pei, but he wasn't any older. At that moment, I realized he was under the effect of some substance. With customers like that, you have to be super alert, because you never know if they'll try to steal something, so I followed him with my eyes as he walked down the aisles until he slowly walked back to my counter. "Where's all the cough syrup?" he asked. I pointed to the cough syrup behind the display case because, well, addicts sometimes use that to make their concoctions, so we had to change our sales policies, so I said, "I can only sell you 1 bottle, bro." He stared at me like I had just told him I was going to put his dog down, and suddenly his expression changed. "I'm going to be around," he said, and walked out, slamming the door. In my gut, I had a bad feeling about this guy. Usually when addicts don't get what they want, they retaliate and hurl insults at me. But this was weird, like he was calm. So I knew he'd be back. An hour went by and no one else came in. And sure enough, he came back. But this time, he didn't come in the same dirty brown suit. This time he was dressed as a chicken. Yes, you read that right. A chicken costume, a giant dirty suit that looked like he had taken it out of the garbage. I couldn't believe it. I had to cover my mouth to keep from bursting out laughing. "Hey buddy, I need 5 cough syrups," he said. "Sorry, sir," I replied. "Just like last time, I only sell 1 per customer, that's our rule. I told you I've never been here before, and every pharmacy I've been to, they sell me the amount of cough syrup I want with no problem," the guy insisted. "What were you thinking? How did you get that chicken costume?" I said. At that moment, honestly, it was the most surreal thing that has ever happened to me. I couldn't contain my laughter at the absurdity of the situation. But suddenly, the laughter turned to horror as this man pulled a huge, sharp machete out of the back of his suit and started swinging it in front of me. Before I could react, he jumped over the counter and began to bring the machete close to my face. The space behind my counter was tiny, crammed with shelves full of drugs and no way to run away. I could only barely dodge him. At one point, the man cut my shirt and I had to turn my body to the side, crashing into one of the shelves. I ended up falling to the ground as he brought the machete down to the level of my neck. "Now can you sell me the cough syrup or do I still look funny to you?" he said to me in a mischievous way. The guy demanded that I open the counter door and handed me a bag to put all the cough syrup I had in there plus the money from the cash register. I was completely terrified and didn't know what to do. I held up both hands as a sign that I would do nothing as I moved to the small access door next to the counter and made way for him, unable to do much else. Before I reached the little door, however, I slid my hand under the counter slyly and pressed the emergency button that was hidden near the cash register. I honestly had no idea if that button worked or not, as I had never used it before, and to be honest, many things in the store needed maintenance, including the security cameras, some of which worked and some of which didn't, so there was no guarantee that the panic button would be active. However, it was the only thing I could do at that moment. Now I understood about the chicken costume, and I felt very stupid for having seen it as something funny, because in reality, this was done on purpose so as not to be recognized in case there were cameras. The man walked through the door to the counter and made me walk to the shelf in the back storeroom, where all the cough syrup was. There were about 25 or 30 bottles there, and I put them all in the bag. After that, we walked back to the box, and he had me take out what little I had made during the night and put it in the same bag. Once he got what he wanted, I thought he would leave me alone, but instead he made me walk back to the back of the cellar. At that moment, I felt very panicky because I didn't know what he wanted to do with me. Maybe his intention was to murder me and leave me there. But once we were inside, he asked me for the set of pharmacy keys that were hanging out of my pocket at the time. All this while holding the machete still on my throat. I begged him not to hurt me, told him I had a wife and a son. Then he half smiled in a very sinister way and said, "Oh, it's a shame there's going to be a new widow and a new orphan in the social services line." After those words, the man raised the sharp machete, intending to cut off my head. I swear it is absolutely true when people say that your whole life flashes before your eyes the moment you feel you're about to die. That's exactly what happened to me in that split second, as I squeezed my eyes tightly shut, waiting for the lunge. But fortunately, it never came. Instead, I heard a loud laugh, followed by the chicken man's footsteps coming out of the cellar and locking the door behind him. At that moment, I began to cry, with a mixture of panic and relief that I can't even explain. But that had been the scariest moment of my entire life, and I could only pray that the man was gone. However, at that instant, a familiar sound caught my attention. It was the sirens of the police approaching. A few seconds later, the officers entered the premises and had to breach the cellar door in order to rescue me. Unfortunately, they were never able to catch the guy, and neither could they identify him from the security camera footage, since, as I deduced, thanks to the chicken costume, which by the way they found in a nearby dumpster, they could not distinguish him. After this incident, I ended up quitting the pharmacy and now work at a dealership. I was working as a night clerk at a gas station that was open 24 hours in the late 90s before they had those credit card readers at every pump. I had been on the job for 2 years, and although it was tiring, it was good enough for me because I was in college. During the day, the job wore me out, but it helped me pay the bills and incidentally gave me some money to buy beers and other things. The gas station was on the outskirts of town, so it wasn't very busy at that time of day. However, the truckers were passing by enough to make it worthwhile to keep the place open. I was doing pretty well, as I was taking advantage of all my free time to study until my shift started at 2 a.m. Actually, this is probably the only crazy thing that happened to me while working there, so I remember it in detail. It was a Friday night in late fall, and everything was pretty quiet. Usually we'd get 4 to 5 people every hour or so, but that night, with about an hour to go before my duties were over, I had only taken care of one truck driver and one other guy who was passing through, when suddenly, around 1 a.m., I was almost asleep with a natural science book in my hands. That's when the doorbell rang, indicating that someone was coming in. The guy who showed up didn't look too good. He was wearing a rather long wool coat, a cap, and had a gray beard that reached his chest. From a distance, I could tell he had very red eyes. He looked like he had been awake for days. A strong smell of weed and alcohol pervaded the store as soon as he entered. As I mentioned, the gas station was far from any residential area, so it was unusual to see someone at that hour. The guy was wobbling a bit as he looked around the aisles, checking out various products. To be honest, I didn't really feel scared. He wasn't very imposing, rather short, bald and chubby, not at all intimidating. I figured he was most likely just looking for something to eat and would leave quickly after grabbing something, so I watched him walk back down the aisles, and at one point I asked him if he needed help, but he just grunted and went about his business. I thought maybe the guy was just looking for a way to warm up before he left, so I decided to leave him alone. I went back to my book, and it wasn't long before I got a little freaked out because I didn't hear this guy approach until he was right in the box. Suddenly he appeared, and in a slurred voice asked me, "Do you have any cigarettes?" I had a wall full of cigarettes behind me, so I asked him what kind he wanted. He insisted, No, do you have any?" I told him I didn't smoke, but if he wanted to buy some. I could help him. What happened next I will remember forever. His face went pale and I noticed he was looking at something behind me. I turned around, but there were only more cigarettes on the wall. I looked again and he let out a terrified scream as he pointed at something with an expression of utter horror on his face. It reminded me of that typical scene in horror movies where the main character comes face to face with the ghost or whatever, and the panicked expression is caught on close-up by the camera. He looked truly frightened. Then he walked up to the counter, grabbed me by the shirt, and staring at me yelled, "They're here, they're here," before shoving me back and bolting out the door. That took me by surprise and I wasn't expecting it at all. It was the last I saw of him. A couple of minutes later, I saw him out the window, pacing back and forth and yelling into the air while banging his head with his fist. I didn't know what to do, so I closed the door quickly and watched him for a while. As it was clear he had no intention of leaving, so I called the police to inform them that the guy was being a nuisance. They told me they would send someone soon, but I couldn't risk him hurting a customer or a customer deciding to act up and do something to this poor guy, who was clearly not well. From the time I called until the cops arrived, only about 15 minutes passed. During that time, an old Chevrolet pickup truck pulled up. I was worried that a customer would be upset, but then I saw a guy, probably in his 20s, talking to the man who clearly had mental problems. Then I saw the younger guy help the other guy into the car, and before I could get out to see what was going on, they were gone. Then the police arrived, and I gave them the best summary I could of everything that had happened, including the car and the description of the young man. I have no idea what happened to the guy who needed help, or the guy who gave him a ride. Sometimes I wonder if the young man was a friend, or some relative of the sick man, taking him to safety, but there could also be some darker story behind that. I had an amazing vibe that day. It was going to be one of my best days in at least the last 6 months. After weeks of interviews, checking references, and a lot of phone calls, I finally got a new job. I put on my new clothes and looked in the mirror after patting my dog, who was lying on the side of my bed, a little sleepy. I knew my old man would have been proud of me if I had been here to see him. The sun was setting and I decided it was time to head out. It wasn't a very long drive from home, but by the time I got outside, I could already see some stars peeking out of the sky. The gate was open, so I took the opportunity to find a good place to park. The other security guard waved at me as he got into his truck. "That's it, buddy," he said to me as he drove off. "The park is all yours, bro. Call me if you need anything." I nodded, and he drove off down the main road. Looking back, I enjoyed the view of the hills covered with tombstones and small mausoleums that looked like lighthouses as night fell. The street lamps along the road barely illuminated the place. Although the cemetery was huge, they had let me use a golf cart, but I decided to walk on my first night. I wanted to take my time and get to know the place. I needed to familiarize myself and adjust to my new role as caretaker of the cemetery. I was surprised to see so many rows and rows of headstones on the perfectly manicured lawn. Some had flowers on them, but most were dry and neglected, with small cracks and crumbling parts. As one of the largest cemeteries in the state, the place kept expanding, with new plots for the endless stream of deceased. As I passed by a mausoleum, I took out my flashlight and checked the area. I had been told that some vandals were using these spaces as a makeshift shelter for the night. I did not understand how anyone could sleep in such a place, sharing space with the dead, but that was a big problem of the place. Another problem was that many of the old mausoleums were adorned with valuable things that represented a great booty for the criminals. After a couple of hours without major incident, I heard some possums trying to get into one of the containers. It was the loud metal noise that caught my attention, but it was a distant echo and I struggled to tell where it was coming from. As I searched for the source of the sound, all the street lights in the cemetery began to flicker and then suddenly went out. Although the moonlight illuminated the path, I took out my flashlight. I had been told that the electrical system, being so old, failed from time to time and just needed a reset, which was near the entrance to the cemetery. I decided I had to find out where that noise was coming from before I tried to restart the power. A strange, uncomfortable feeling came over the cemetery, right where there used to be light. Another tinkling sound led me to one of the older mausoleums at the back of the grounds. I turned off my flashlight and slipped quietly toward the mausoleum, keeping to the shadows. Just as I was about to jump in to catch the suspect, I noticed it was empty. The lid of the tomb inside was open, and as I peeked in, I saw that it was completely empty. There was only a trail of dirt around the edges. My heart began to beat fast, and my imagination shot to dark places, thinking of the dead walking around the place. I decided to repair the lights as soon as possible. If I was going to encounter nightwalkers, I'd rather it be with some light. I went to the control panels and tried to reset the system, flipping the necessary switches. But nothing. Neither a faint buzzing sound nor the lights came back on. While I was at it, a movement in the yard distracted me. I left the lights and went over to investigate. Walking softly, I heard some subtle movements, jumped out of my hiding place, and shivered at the sight of a skeletal face staring at me from a body covered in leaves and moss. Fear paralyzed me in a second, but the creature turned around and began to walk away. Quickly, I noticed a golden badge it held in its hand, and without a second thought, I ran after it. I slipped on the grass but managed to regain my balance and increase the distance between us. The figure didn't seem to run as fast as I did, and when I was close, I lunged and grabbed the creature, thinking I would find a thin skeletal body. But to my surprise, it was all muscle and flesh. We both fell to the ground, almost breaking a tombstone in our path. We struggled for a moment until I managed to get the plaque off. Then that creature moved away from me, quickly getting up. The skeleton mask he wore fell off and I could see his face. I considered catching him, but it was useless because there was nothing to stop him from escaping, so I let him go. He ran to the edge of the cemetery and vanished into the darkness. The police were slow to arrive, so while I waited, I checked the lighting systems and discovered that the wires had been cut in several places. Upon further investigation, we found the location of the stolen plaque and in addition a grave that had been unearthed. Who knows what kind of treasures had been hidden with the dead, if anything had been found in the grave. The gravedigger wasn't too thrilled with the situation, but it didn't take him too long to get everything back to normal. I fixed the system and passed along some recommendations to my boss to try to keep the masked thieves out of the cemetery. Even though I described the thief to the police, I knew the guy was still out there, stalking cemeteries under the guise of a dead man, looking for any little thing he could steal from those who are no longer in this world. The new people in the office started to give off a weird vibe. I wasn't sure if my old job had been a complete disaster, so I decided to leave. Getting this new position was a piece of cake. I had experience as a professional photographer for several event and nature magazines, so I knew how to catch those special moments. From the beginning, I could tell that this company really wanted me. The place was full of pink and lilac tones, which gave me a good vibe. I was thrilled to realize that for the first time in 6 years I had an office all to myself, and it was in a quiet, cozy little corner of the building. It was everything I had wished for. I scrolled through the desks in the office, specially designed for the writers and journalists who filled the second floor. I greeted my new colleagues and settled into my space, but it was time to get to work. I opened my laptop and began reviewing photos from events I had covered earlier. A shot of the famous bride looking very happy as she gazed at her new husband smiled at me from the screen. My old boss had said it was a cliché, but the magazine team went crazy over the image, and truth be told, I felt very valued since I walked through the door of this new agency. While I was in the interview room, someone knocked on the door and I put my computer on sleep mode. There was my new boss, Mr. Sif. I stood up and smoothed my pants, then smiled politely at him. "Thank you for coming," I said as he sat down across from me. He explained that there was a special event he needed me to cover, but this was something super confidential that the magazine required urgently, and he believed I was the right person for the task. "This has to stay between the two of us. I know you're astute. I've seen your work and I admire how meticulous you are. You have that ability to go unnoticed in any crowd and get amazing results. I trust you," he said, and promised to give me more details as soon as he knew he could trust me completely, but I was left quite puzzled. I didn't expect so much intrigue on my first day. What else could be behind it? Could there be skeletons hiding behind the door? I attended 3 events that day and went back to the office to do some editing. At the end of the day, Mr. Cliff showed up again and asked me if I was willing to cover that confidential event. As a lover of adventure and mystery, I had been thinking about his offer all day, so I decided that I would. It was killing my curiosity and I couldn't wait to find out what this was all about. In the meantime, he seemed pleased, but a little hesitant. He promised to give me more details the next day, and that night I couldn't sleep. My eyes were wide open as I stared at the ceiling. I wondered what kind of work Mr. Cliff would have in store for me the next day. The next day, my boss arrived at exactly the expected time. He first asked me for the photos I had taken the day before, and then got serious. He started telling me about a group of elites that he said really controlled the city. He had had a tip-off that they met every Friday night in an old cabin, and he needed someone he could trust to take photos and gather evidence. As after many frustrations, he had tried to uncover the shady secrets of these elites, but had never succeeded. I revealed that I used to run a well-known crime and shady business magazine on the dark side of town, but the elites had it shut down. I got excited as Mr. Cliff laid out the plan we would have to execute for this mission, as I had to be present at his secret meeting that same Saturday, so I decided to get as camouflaged as possible. I dressed in a black sweatshirt, dark pants, and a cap. I drove to the darkest part of town and parked a couple of blocks before the abandoned building. When I arrived, everything was in semi-darkness, but I found the entrance to the basement. As I turned on my flashlight, making sure the place was empty, I glanced around. The basement was deserted, but there were candles in different places, and I noticed a stain that looked like blood on the floor. Apparently, something horrible had happened there. So I took a couple of pictures and continued investigating, but soon I began to hear strange noises. So I paid for the flashlight and ran to a hiding place Mr. Cliff had told me about. From my corner, I had a clear view as the dim lights came on and people began to enter the room, all dressed in red robes. I snapped a couple of pictures trying to recognize faces, and was actually surprised to see some that looked quite familiar. Among them, Mayor Murray, one of the city's most prestigious doctors, the owner of almost every grocery store, and a wealthy businesswoman whose daughter had married a monarch last month. I was terrified, but the adrenaline kept me excited. I watched as the 11 members of a strange group began to make strange noises. It was as if someone was conducting a ritual. "It's time to renew the oath we took. It's time to complete the circle of the Brotherhood," the doctor declared as the others nodded. "It's been 12 years since the death of Old Corner, and we need someone new to complete the circle of 13 anchors." Now I was beginning to understand each of them had a small anchor drawn on the robe, which made it very easy for me to surmise that this was some sort of ritual to swear in or baptize or do whatever it is you do in a cult with a new member. The only thing that intrigued me was that they were talking about 13 anchors, but there were only 11 people in the room. It got even more intense when they brought out a goat to sacrifice. From there, everything got stormier. While they were going into a trance, one of the guys said they should take it to the grocery store. I thought Mr. Cliff would be so proud of me. Not only had I uncovered a secret cult, but I was about to witness their newest member in action. The rituals continued, and I kept taking pictures until I felt a hand touch my shoulder. I turned, terrified, thinking I'd been caught, but when I turned to see who it was that had discovered me, I saw it was Mr. Cliff, who motioned for me to shut up. I was about to ask him what he was doing there when I saw his attire. My heart skipped a beat when I realized that he was also wearing the red robe. He was part of them, and in that second I understood that I was the next one to be recruited. The old man in the group, who seemed to have understood everything, smiled from the shadows. "Follow me and join the Brotherhood. If you do, you will live." I felt a shiver as I heard those words, as the rest of the sentence went unintended. If I didn't follow, I would surely meet a very bad end, so, like a sheep to the slaughter, I followed obediently. The group smiled in satisfaction, as if I had done something good. Today, a year after that event, oh my, what a nightmare my life has become. I am now a trapped member with no way out, and worst of all, I have been involuntarily sucked into a rotten world of crime and corruption. During meetings, the group plans horrible things, and then each member is assigned a part of the job. Believe me, it's a living hell, and there you are, reading my story, thinking you're in control of your life. Let me tell you something. You are just a pawn. Everything is under the control of these elite brotherhoods, men and women who are disgusting but full of a lot of money and power. I hate to be one of them, but I have no choice, because from this kind of brotherhoods, there is only one way out: dead.